The opportunity of a lifetime. Here's your opportunity of a lifetime. You're ready to go.
Oh, thank you, thank you, thank you. How's everybody doing tonight? Hey, I'm happy to be here. It's an honor to be here. Thank you so much. I haven't been here in a very, very long time. It's good to see some wonderful new faces, and it's also good to see some old, not old that kind of way, but you know what I mean, especially Ralph, you know. Ralph said he's been around a long time, and I hope that each and every one of us are around for a long time. Very sad to hear about one of our qualified speakers. However, we're going to just move right along because they tell me I got 2 minutes to say something about 25 minutes. But I gotta start off with this particular statement here. If you can finish this statement for me, it'd be wonderful. To know me is to, say it again, to know me is to love me. Okay, but I got a question for you. Can you know someone? Can you really, truly ever know someone without knowing where they've been? Food for thought there. You know, it's been a great track record, a great journey for me personally, being a Toastmaster. And I got to tell you, it hasn't always been a bed of roses, and that's for sure. So I had a birdie land on my shoulder not too long ago, and this birdie and I had a conversation. Well, mostly the birdie was speaking to me because I've become a listener. I've learned to listen a lot better than I did when I was growing up. And this little birdie said to me, every time I hear you, I hear a little bit of something that I didn't know. And I thought about it a minute, scratched my head, and that sunk in just a little bit. And then that little birdie landed on my shoulder again, sometime later. And you know, sometimes we don't feel like knocking or answering the door when it knocks. Sometimes we just don't want to open our eyes or get up and check the door. And so this little birdie, thank goodness for this little birdie, landed on my shoulder. This time it was the other shoulder. And this little birdie said, you know, that was interesting what I heard about you, but every time I hear something, it's a little bit more about you. And I got to thinking about that and what that person was actually trying to say. You see, it wasn't really a bird, it was a person. And this person had heard me talk several times, present several different times. And the lesson there is we really have to listen to what people are saying. Because if we listen really, really well, that just might lead us down the pathway, no pun intended, towards experiencing the opportunity of a lifetime. Now, it may not be that one thing, it could be more than one thing, but listening is really, really important. What I found out as I really paid attention was that I want people to love me. Don't we all want people to love us? To at least like us? And on top of that, they say that in order for people to do business with you, they got to know, like, and trust you. Well, how can they know, like, and trust you if they don't know you? So I scratched the other side of my head. And what I decided to do was start looking back over the past and really try to understand my own story. And I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why, because I was focused for years, especially when I became a Toastmaster and I figured out what my purpose in life was. What I decided to do was worry and stress and take care of others, mentor others, because I always thought that was the way. And I'm not saying it's not, but how can people learn to love you if they don't know your story? So I'm going to take you back to 1954 AD. September 1st was my born on date. Now, we all have born on dates, and that was my born on date. Yes, I'm 68 years old, and I feel pretty good. Lost a few pounds recently. But that was just the beginning, and of course, I didn't have anything to do with that. When I was 18 months old, they tell me I had spinal meningitis. I was born in Boston, Massachusetts, and this babysitter of ours called my mother up and said, Mrs. Brown, you see, my mother's last name is Brown. My last name is Powell. You can figure out that she was divorced and remarried. And so what happened was they didn't have any way of really helping me. But the doctor said, well, we can try this medicine because worst case scenario, he's not going to make it anyhow. And she said, go ahead. So I'm here. And I'm grateful for that physician, that medical team. But I was 18 months old. Then when I was 10 years old, I love water, love the lakes, and we lived in Clinton, Massachusetts. See, I was an army brat, I'll say it. And Fort Devens, Massachusetts was right there. We lived in Clinton, Massachusetts, and there was a lake out there, and I loved laying out in the inner tube. But one special day, I fell asleep in the inner tube. Now, I don't know about you, but if you've ever fallen asleep in inner tube, you probably slipped through it like I did. And all I remember doing is fighting, and I was going down the third time. Thank God my brother was on the beach with his best friend, and his best friend just happened to roll over and see me going down the third time, and here I am, still here. That was at 10 years old. Well, you know Franco Harris from the Pittsburgh Steelers just passed away, right? Well, Franco and I had the pleasure of going to the same high school that Franco Harris went to. And Carl Lewis lived in Willingboro, New Jersey, but we grew up about 10 miles from Willingboro in a little town called Mount Holly, New Jersey. So again, the Army got me down near Fort Dix, New Jersey. We lived in Mount Holly, New Jersey, had a wonderful high school and a great, great sports program. Well, when I was 14 years old, I couldn't wait to get to high school. I had been playing football for a long time. You know, I had a football career at age 14. My brother, my oldest brother, he was 21 years old. He was about to get married. He was living in New York City. Graduation came, 8th grade graduation came, and he came from New York City to see me graduate from F.W. Holbein School. Well, what happened? He came from New York with these shoes. They're almost as nice as these shoes I'm wearing tonight. And I fell in love with those shoes, and he promised me he would send me a pair from New York City. Now, something you don't know about my brother, his name was Kenneth Powell. And he always said, don't ever make a promise that you don't expect to keep. Well, 2 weeks went by and the shoes didn't come, and I started getting nervous. Started worrying about my shoes. But that was the wrong thing to worry about. I'm out with my friends. I come home and I see all these cars around the house. I just thought maybe my mom had some friends over. Lo and behold, I walk in, and my mom's boyfriend, who happened to be a flight engineer, his name was Stat. Nickname was Stat. He was a smart man. He grabbed me by the collar, took me out back, sat me in his 1967 Thunderbird, and said, I've got something to talk to you about, son. And I said, what? He said, we're not getting out of the car until you get yourself together. And I'm like, what is he talking about? And the next thing I know, he tells me that Kenny passed away. And I sat there and it didn't even sink in. It didn't sink in for probably 10 or 15 minutes because I was in shock. You see, Kenny was my best friend. My mom was divorced. She had a boyfriend. He was a nice guy. He was a great guy, actually. But Kenny was my big brother. I looked up to him. He was a bookworm, smart, but he had to work for everything he got. And I knew one day I was going to be just like him. I wanted to be a computer technician just like he was. He was working for Digital Computers in Maynard, Massachusetts, and then they moved into New York City. He had hit the big leagues and found a girlfriend, and he was getting ready to get married, 21 years old. We were sitting in that car. Stack told me, he said, your brother died from a brain hemorrhage. And your mom's going to need you now more than ever. You're going to become the man of the house today. And you're going to have to go upstairs where she's at. And you're going to have to be with her. So long story short, obviously at 14 years old, I was shocked, et cetera, et cetera. It changed my life because I had a younger brother. I became the protector that year because all I could think about was taking care of my mom and my little brother. So I went upstairs and I laid on my mom's floor next to her bed as she cried and wept all night long. And the years passed. Things went pretty well for a while. You heal, you never forget. You're reminded, but you never forget. But that might have been one of those things that created in the future that I didn't know the opportunity of a lifetime. Because I had to become a man that day. And my brother to this day still thanks me for taking care of him. And I never thought about it too much. My brother happens to be a multimillionaire. He's worth millions. I never even thought about it till about 6 months, 8 months ago, that he was doing that well. I knew he was doing okay, but I remember a time when he struggled and struggled and struggled as an entrepreneur. And I remember him telling me one time he didn't think he was going to be able to pay his rent. And so I'm going to fast forward right now to the age of 19. In the age of 19, I went in the military. And I had a great career in the military. But 2 years after being in, I was taking a friend of mine to meet a cousin on my way to Philadelphia. He was going overseas in the Army. And we were in a rear-end collision. Car hit us 65 miles an hour, and we were sitting still on the 95 South in Jersey. We hadn't made it across the bridge to Philadelphia. And the car took off. And the only thing that I can tell you is God is great. Because we never hit the car in front of us. The car spun to the right and went off the bridge, but we didn't fall off. There was a tree that hit my 76 Monte Carlo dead center, stopped us. I was going to introduce my cousin to a lady who I thought would be a great match. I was a matchmaker, I thought. Well, a week later after that accident, I took care of her. She was in shock. We got her medical treatment, all that. I went to get out of bed to go to work. And I was in a one-bedroom apartment on the third floor of my mom's house because I had told her when I got my job, I was going to rent that apartment. And I did. $150 a month. I was big time. I made more in my first year than the high school teachers who were teaching me. I crawled out of the bed because my legs weren't working. And I was paralyzed for 9.5 months. I got back to work in the 10.5 month, but for 9.5 months, I didn't have the use of my legs. The good news is, I worked for the government. You see, I was a civil service employee, but I was in the reserves. So I had a good government job, or I would have probably lost my job. Fast forward, after that, I had the opportunity of a lifetime to move to California. So I moved to California because the military, the reserves out here were changing planes, and I had the experience in the F-4 Phantom that they were moving into. We worked out in Ontario, and then eventually we moved to March Air Force Bases, which is where I retired. Fast forward, I left there and went to work for Northrop. After 22 years in the reserves, 19 years civil service, I got out and I went to work for Northrop Research and Development. And I finished up at the B-2 division. And I'll tell you what, it was a great career. It was only 3 years. It was fast-paced, working on black programs. And then went to several other Fortune 500 companies. Fast forward to 2013. I worked for the smallest company I'd ever worked for, a NASDAQ-traded company. Have you ever worked for a big company and go to a little company? It's a massive change. And we used to talk to people and communicate in big companies. And I went to a small company, and the person working in a cubicle over there didn't know what was going on. I couldn't understand it. But I lost my job in 2013 after 30 plus years of being an exceptional performer. And at that time, Cheryl Rouse was my coach because I had joined Toastmasters. And she said, don't quit your day job until your speaking can handle it. And I said, okay. But the day I lost my job, I got really, really depressed after I realized it really happened. And eventually my wife and I drove to San Diego, met with Cheryl, and I told her I had lost my job. She said, good. You've been freed up to do what you're supposed to be doing. I didn't know what to say. I looked at my wife, Susan. She looked at me. We drove home. And for a while, I was depressed and mixed up and confused and felt worthless. But here's a life lesson. Your job is not who you are. Let me say that one more time. Your job is not who you are. Another opportunity to create the opportunity of a lifetime. So I got back in the saddle. Now, I will tell you, I did go into treatment, but it was a Toastmasters treatment. The help of my wife, my closest friends, and Toastmasters, I got back on the horse and got on with life. And ever since then, the opportunities have just been abound, have just flown over. So I want to share with you why I think that is true. Not just because of Toastmasters, not because of Cheryl, not because of all the trainings, the certifications, the accreditations in coaching, not because I'm a #1 Amazon best-selling author. I don't even talk about that stuff. It's because of the relationships that I have had the opportunity to create, and they're so powerful and meaningful that it's just unbelievable. So when you open up and share your story, you begin the process of letting people know something more about you than the surface stuff. And the relationships get stronger when you open up, and you never know what's going to create that next opportunity. Some of the people here tonight on the screen in front of us know exactly what I'm talking about. It started here. I got to travel with Dana Lamont, and that was an opportunity of a lifetime. Then I met Craig Duswalt. Eventually, after following Craig for a long time, joined his mastermind. And Craig has introduced me to hundreds of different people across the nation. I got the opportunity to fly from coast to coast and get paid for flying and get paid well. And then started coaching. And the reason coaching came was from speaking. And then I realized I'm really working to add value to people's lives, and it's starting to take hold. And it's been the biggest, greatest joy ever since that day when they said, I'm not on your team anymore. You're not on my team anymore. We got to let you go. So be careful when you speak up. You do have to speak up, but know that it could cost you. It could cost you when you speak up. But as Dr. Myron Golden says, you got to stand up, you got to speak up, and you got to show up if you expect the world to take notice of you. The most important thing that I can share with you as we leave is that right now, all I do is help people create the courage to get unstuck. And that starts with knowing your purpose. Purpose leads to passion. Passion leads to your power. And your power leads to the courage that you need to face whatever it is in life that you're facing. We all have been stuck. You might be stuck on something right now. It could be a small thing. It could be a really big thing. But you need the courage to admit that you're stuck and then ask someone for help. Because most people are afraid to ask for help. And you would be amazed how many people I have said, can you help me? We're doing a masterclass right now, starting the 17th. We've done one. There's a 3-part, and I've got some awesome people just showing up as guest speakers because of the power of relationships. And those things are creating the opportunity of a lifetime. So I say to you, figure out what your purpose is. Make sure that you understand that that purpose is going to be filling some big shoes, and have the courage to recognize if you're stuck, there's people out here that will help you, but you got to ask. You got to ask for help. And that, ladies and gentlemen, will create the opportunity of a lifetime. Mr. Toastmaster.